now.
Okay. Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Last Friday, we were talking about confidentiality, and we're just going to finish that up here right away this morning. And so when we're talking about safeguarding confidential information, Dodie, if you would hit that first one, it says, if you collect information about the substance use behavior program participants in any form, then you need to know how to protect these records. So under federal law, so that 42 CFR Part 2, so if you're not familiar, I'm sure a lot of you are, but if you're not familiar with 42 CFR Part 2, I would encourage you to look it up and read into it a little bit more. But it states if you collect information about substance use behavior or participant programs in any form, then you need to know how to protect those records. Go ahead, Dodie. So you want to develop written procedures regulating access to confidential records. So if a prevention program maintains participant records that include confidential information, then it must have written procedures regulating access to and the use of these records. Again, if it's a universal prevention program, that's different because that's not disclosing any information about someone's use. But if you're doing indicated or selective, so you're doing a group with substance users, or you're doing diversion class, those are records that need to be confidential because that is information about people who have used substances. Communication procedures to participants and writing before a program begins. So the procedures regarding confidentiality of records must be communicated to participants in writing before a program begins. So this has made my life a lot easier that we've gone to a lot of virtual. Now when people come in to do their assessment, and they fill it all out online, and so they've already read through these and agreed to all of this before I even start the diversion class, and it's all saved online. So I'm loving that procedure. You want to make sure that you keep the confidential records in a secure location. So you would want to make sure that they're in a locked, filing cabinet or some place where people wouldn't have easy access to. Or if you are paperless, make sure that if it's on the computer that it's saved, like for me, it's an H drive, but you're saving it on, you're not putting it in My Documents on your computer where people could just have easy access to it. You want to make sure it's in a secure location. And then delete or destroy confidential records once a program ends. So must be deleted for participant records, or the records must be destroyed if a program is discontinued or taken over by another agency unless participants consent to a transfer. So making sure that we are, shredding all those documents. Any questions about any of those? Go ahead, Dodie. So when a participant provides written consent or under a specific circumstance is the only time that we can release this confidential information. So an example of that is with diversion class, I have, and again, they're doing this online now, but they're signing a release of information so that when they're done with the class, then I can go ahead and submit a completion to the court. So I fax over a completion letter and a certificate to the courts. But in order for me to be able to do that for them, they need to sign that release of information. Or if they did the screen in our agency, but they decided to do the diversion class with, let's say, Carroll Institute, because that class works better for them, they need to sign a release of information so that we can send over that screening to Carroll Institute. Go ahead, Dodie. So again, it can be released when a participant or legal guardian signs that legal valid consent form. And the form must include all the elements required by law. And, in our state, it says that some states might require the legal guardian to sign it as well if the young person is a minor. Well, I work with 18 to 20-year-olds with diversion. I don't know the exact law on this. I would encourage you to look it up, but I know in our state, if you're over the age of 14, you can receive treatment services in our state without having parent consent. And you can be 16 or older and receive mental health services without parent consent. Now, if insurance comes into play, parents are going to find out anyways, but they wouldn't have to legally sign that document. Any questions or any comments or anything that you guys know of that you'd want to add to that? Okay, go ahead, Dodie. So again, we cannot release confidential information without consent. But these are 6 circumstances which they're outlined in that 42 CFR Part 2. As we do so, you may want to refer to the summary of the confidential principles to help you follow along. So there is a handout that you can look at, but we're going to go through these pretty quickly. So internal program circumstances. So confidential information can be shared with colleagues within a prevention program. You know, so if you were working, let's say I was in diversion and I was kind of questioning whether this, one of the young people should maybe be in outpatient treatment, I could go to my supervisor and talk about that situation to see if I feel like this is the best class for them. So I think the simple way of going with that internal program communication, you can share information with those up or within, but not across programs. So I couldn't go to, you know, someone who's working on our Choices program with people with disabilities and talk to them about a client I'm working with. But I could talk to Erin, my coworker, if we need to discuss something, or I could talk to my supervisor, Amy, because that's within the program, but I couldn't go outside the program. Okay. So just remember across or up, but not, I'm sorry, up or within, but not across programs. Court orders and criminal investigations, confidential information may be released in a response to a court order. So that's another example where you wouldn't need consent from the participant. Go ahead, Dodie. Abuse and neglect. Prevention professionals are mandated by law to report suspected child abuse and neglect by a current caretaker to relevant child welfare authorities. So confidential participation information may be disclosed as needed to protect children and others from suspected abuse or neglect. So you would not need, Dodie, did you hit the next one?
There's something wrong with this slide. These are the only 2 that will come up.
Oh.
So I'm sorry.
Okay. No, that's okay. The next one would be crimes involving the program. So confidential information may be released to the police if a participant commits or threatens to commit a crime on the program premises or against staff. Health-related emergencies would be another time that you could release confidential information. It may be shared with medical personnel if a participant is in a situation that poses an immediate threat to the health of the participant or someone else. So if the situation involves suicide, prevention professionals are ethically obligated to report suicidal attempts and threats and are legally required to do so in some states. And then the last one is research, evaluation, and audits. Confidential information may be shared in a time-limited manner with certain qualified individuals or organizations for research, evaluation, or audits of the program. So the decision to release information under these circumstances should be made in collaboration with the program supervisor. Are there any questions about, you know, when to keep it confidential? And I'm sorry, there's 6 boxes here, but when you're allowed to release confidential information without the participant's consent. Any questions about that? Okay, well, again, I would encourage you, if you do have questions about it, if you get into a situation and you're like, geez, I don't know what I should do here, go to that 42 CFR Part 2 or talk to your supervisor about it before you ever disclose participant information without participant consent. So if you remember at the beginning of the confidentiality principle, we had Suzanne and Juanita, and they both work at the same agency, but they're in different programs. So over lunch, Juanita expressed concern about one of Susan's prevention program participants and asks about his substance use behavior. So do you guys remember who was Susan and who was Juanita?
I was Susan.
Okay. So if you could be Susan again and then Juanita.
That was me.
Okay. So Susan's the I'm actually running.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I'm actually running a program right now with a group of middle school students who have been caught experimenting with alcohol and other drugs.
I know. I saw Ethan today, who I think is in your program, and I'm concerned about him. Is he using drugs? He seems like such a nice kid.
Dodie. All right, and then Susan there should be a poll for this, Dodie.
Was there? Okay. Um, I don't have one.
Is it called confidentiality or anything like that? No? Okay. Well, let's just talk through it. When we look at 1, 2, 3, or 4, what do you think Susan should do? Maybe just either, let's say just chat it into the chat box if you would pick 1, 2, 3, or 4. All right, looks like everyone agrees that it's 2, and that's right. Tell Juanita that she cannot share information about any of the youth in her program. And that's because, again, they're not in the same program. So remember, we talked about you can share up or within, but not across. And so it's just important to remember it, because I know I've had that happen to me before. That's a pretty common one or people will say, oh, my nephew is in that treatment program at VOA. His name's such and such. How's he doing? Or is he in that program? Well, of course I can't even confirm, oh yeah, I know Tom. And yeah, I know he's in the program, but I can't say how he's doing. I couldn't even say that. It's just like, okay, I can't, agree nor deny whether he's in the program or not, right? Any questions about that one? Pretty straightforward. Go ahead, Dodie. So just in wrap up with the confidentiality principle, on the key concepts, complying with confidential laws and regulations. So it's important that we know the laws of confidentiality in our state and that we're complying with those. Protecting confidential information from disclosure. So making sure that we're not disclosing that information without the participants, without that release of information, and that we are keeping that information in a secure place where people wouldn't be able to see it or access it. And then releasing confidential information with and without consent. So knowing when we need consent of the participant and knowing when we can release that information without their consent. And again, going back to that CFR 42 CFR Part 2 will really give you those guidelines for that. Any questions? If you would just take out that sheet again that Dodie's asking you guys to fill out for the credit. I don't know why I don't have mine in front of me. Yes, and fill out number 5 on the back, confidentiality. Write one action step you plan to take based on this principle. Maybe what you learned or relearned. I know this was a good part. I took over diversion with really no guidelines on this confidentiality piece. And so I know after I went through it, I had to go back and kind of rework some of this, making sure I was doing all the steps I needed to for confidentiality and the release of information. So it was a good reminder for me, and I learned some things that I needed to take back for that. So anybody want to share something that you learned or relearned, or one action step that you're going to take based on this principle?
I need to be extra sure to not leave little notes on my desk, because like when I am seeing a kid or something for a screening, I might take some notes down. Or if I take a phone call, like I'm writing down a parent's name and a number or something, just on a little piece of sticky note. And I'll leave those sit on my desk by the phone. And I don't know if people have seen them or not, but I need to like either put those in the middle of my desk, like a little flat drawer, or do something else with them?
Charlie says same. I am the same way too. That was an eye opener for me because I think I had even shared that last time. I do that same thing. I have this big calendar, and so I just have a tendency to jot all that down. And I started to be a lot more mindful of that, of not having people's telephone numbers and names and information on that. So thanks for sharing, Belinda. All right, if not, I'm going to turn it over to Dodie, and she's going to touch on this last principle of ethical obligations for community and society.
Right. And then we get to do some real work as far as using that decision-making process. So I'm excited to get to that portion. So talking the talk, walking the walk. You know, this is a well-known phrase that captures much of what this principle that we're talking about is all about. So thinking about this statement, what does this statement mean to you? What do you think this statement means?
Following through with your actions, doing what you say you're going to do, being a role model, those kind of things.
Okay, thank you. How do you think that it applies to our work in prevention as a prevention professional?
Just maybe heeding the same advice that you're giving clients.
Maybe kind of practicing what we preach kind of a thing even?
Yeah, following through with the information that you're giving them, like not using drugs yourself, or if you're using legal drugs like alcohol, using in moderation and in a safe environment, and but not kind of being a hypocrite, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so this principle really calls us to action in many ways to prevent the risks associated with substance use and to promote health and well-being, both during our work hours and even beyond our work hours. And so just kind of keep this in mind as we start to look at what exactly this principle is all about here. So if I could have you pull out that handout, again, that is the Prevention Think Tank Code of Ethical Conduct. And do I have a volunteer that would like to read number 6, ethical obligations for community and society?
I'll read it.
Okay, and as Belinda reads it, you know, just kind of underline those key concepts that kind of jump out at you.
According to their consciences, prevention professionals should be proactive on public policy and legislative issues. The public welfare and the individual's right to services of personal wellness should guide the efforts of prevention professionals, educate the general public and policymakers. Prevention professionals should adopt a personal and professional stance that promotes health.
Okay, thank you. So some key things that jumped out at you?
To me, it gives me permission. Well, and it's interesting because it says obligations, but you know, I feel like it gives me permission to educate the general public on information such as, you know, I just go back to obviously the legalization of marijuana and medical marijuana in our state in November, and as prevention people, we keep talking about how can we not advocate one way or another, but how can we educate people on this, because I think people are going to make a decision based on inaccurate information if we don't get that information out there.
Okay, thank you. So according to this principle, we really are expected to promote health and wellness, both personally and professionally. On the professional level, it really means advocating for prevention, meaning programs, policies, and services that support that wellness. On a personal level, it means striving to apply the knowledge and the skills that we've known, that we have developed as a prevention professional, to protect the health of others and to enhance our own well-being. Okay, so first we're going to start by taking a look at the advocacy piece. So advocacy really means taking action to support an idea or a cause. As prevention professionals, we have an obligation to communities that we work in and to our society as a whole to advocate for those programs and policies and those services that do promote wellness. And so advocacy mainly involves educating those community members, maybe the media, could be elected officials. And our purpose of doing that is to raise awareness about prevention, substance use, and other behavioral health problems. It is also to increase understanding about the key issues surrounding substance abuse and mental health. And then it is to mobilize support to create, with the goal of creating positive change within our community. Can you think of any other reasons that we might advocate for those programs, policies, or services to help support wellness besides what's on this slide? I think it's pretty all-inclusive, but if you had any ideas, just wanted to throw that out there. So when we're looking at advocating, we need to be mindful of our own agencies and who we work for in regards to what are their guidelines surrounding advocacy. So before starting any advocacy efforts, it's important that we know when we understand what our guidelines are that exist within the organization that we are working with. So I do have a poll for this one here. Have you ever, let me just find it quick. And what I'd like you to do is go through and let me know, have you ever done any of these things, yes or no? All right, I'm going to go ahead and end, and I'm going to share results. And as you can see, we have quite a few that have done a number of these things. And whether you knew it or not, these are all things that you can do that is advocacy as a prevention professional. So you've been advocating and maybe you didn't even know it when it comes to prevention. So the other thing that we need to look at though is we need to look at lobbying, because that's where it kind of gets a little bit sticky. And I think that's sometimes why prevention professionals might kind of steer away from like advocating, like Michelle was just referring to, on the medical marijuana and the marijuana legalization, because you know, and a lot of because we receive federal dollars or state dollars, taxpayer dollars, we cannot lobby for the most part unless you have another set of funds that would help, that you would be able to lobby under. And so we just need to take a look at this to make sure to understand the difference between what is advocacy and what is lobbying. So lobbying is a type of advocacy that attempts to influence specific legislation. I think that is key right there. So if we are really targeting specific legislation and you need to vote this way, that would be considered lobbying. So for example, if our state is considering enacting laws that should limit youth access to alcohol, any action to communicate with elected officials and their staff in an effort to influence which way they should vote would be considered lobbying. However, educating the public or the legislators or elected officials on a specific issue is not considered lobbying. So for example, if we provide the public or those decision makers with data that documents the effectiveness of limiting youth access to alcohol, when we're talking about underage drinking and related consequences, that is considered education and advocacy. So that would be considered legal. So according to the US law, educational and non-profit organizations could risk losing our tax-exempt status if a substantial part of our work involve lobbying. So for this reason, it's best to avoid lobbying in your role as a prevention professional. But however, we can and should always check with our funder, with our supervisor, regarding what actions are allowable using grant money on agency time. And, you know, as we have already discussed, advocacy and education about issues related to substance abuse are encouraged. We just make sure that we've done the research required to draw that accurate line between what is advocacy and what is lobbying in our work as prevention professionals. You know, back when Joyce Glynn went to pass the social host law in South Dakota, you know, she wanted people to show up for the committee meeting to kind of support her effort in this. And so because I did not want to like jeopardize anything, I took a vacation day that day and I went to the Capitol as Dodie Haug with no association with the Human Service Agency with the Northeast Prevention Resource Center. Just because I wanted to make sure that if I was, you know, I had to sign in to show that I was there, and I just took all the precautions that I could. In the next key concept, so actually, let's just talk about this. Are there any questions in regards to the lobbying versus advocacy before I go into the next concept? The document that I emailed out with today's Zoom is a strategizer from CADCA, and it really does a nice job of kind of spelling out the difference between lobbying and between advocacy. I think it's a really informative document that, you know, if you're considering or questioning things, it should be helpful in helping you do some research as well. So the next key concept of this principle is prevention professionals are asked to consider appropriate roles and responsibilities, not only at work, but also outside of work. So let's think for a moment. Imagine that you're on a plane 30,000 feet above the air and the person next to you is a physician. Suddenly a man 6 rows back has a heart attack. The doctor's on vacation, but should she try to help? What do you think?
Yes.
Yes, that is correct. And the reason being is because according to the Medical Code of Ethics, it is a physician's ethical responsibility to provide care in a medical emergency, even when they are off duty, okay? So how do you think this concept relates to us as prevention professionals? Where are we obligated to maybe intervene or help out or act outside
We're
of
sitting on a plane 30,000 feet in the air and the person sitting next to us is a parent of an addicted kid and they just start chatting away about, you know, we can give information and educate them. And
yeah, good example.
it was very original, wasn't it?
It was, because you just want to be on a plane going somewhere, don't you? Sitting beside that doctor. Any others? So basically, in situations where someone's substance-related behavior may be harmful to themselves or others, such as if someone is looking to get behind the wheel of a car after drinking alcohol or other drugs, that kind of a thing at a party, we as prevention professionals have that ethical obligation to intervene, okay? And why is that? It's because we know, because of our profession, the risks of driving while intoxicated, and we, like the doctor, are held to a little bit higher standard than other onlookers because we are educated in this and we know the dangers associated with it.
And this is a tough one, I think.
And actually, one of the, it's interesting because one of the scenarios that we will look at during the next section that Michelle will walk us through, you know, it kind of puts this one into play, because it's not going to always be an easy situation. It might be somebody that you know, but it might be somebody that you don't know as well. And, you know, how easy would it be to just turn the other way, it's none of my business, but yet when it's putting someone else at risk of harm, it has to do with substance abuse, mental health, you know, it's important that we do kind of take that to the next level and step up and intervene.
What if you yourself are drinking? Or like, what if that doctor had been drinking? Like,
Well, I guess give me a little bit more detail on that. You mean like if you're saying you can't tell them not to drive after they've been drinking because you've been drinking?
well, I mean, no, I don't really feel that way, but I guess that's why I'm asking the question, because I wouldn't want a doctor who's been drinking to help me through my heart attack. I mean, maybe if no one else is around, I don't know.
If it was your last resort.
Right.
You know, I think you'd have to go back to the ethical guidelines for a doctor to say, you know, if you've had more than one or two drinks, how do you handle that? Or maybe they could talk it through with somebody. I kind of think our ethical obligation as prevention people is that we stay within those low risk guidelines of alcohol use if we're going to choose to use. So you would never be under the influence of alcohol, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Before getting behind the wheel of a car, kind of.
Well, or if I was even to have a conversation with somebody who, because I hear what you're saying, if you yourself is under the, like if you had a few, have that conversation with somebody.
I don't even think someone who's under the influence is incapable of making a good judgment and not driving.
Right.
You know, but also is there, is it going to do some discredit to the profession or, like, I don't know.
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. And I think that's a fine line we always walk as preventionists. And going back to what are our ethical guidelines? So if we are going to choose to use alcohol, are we staying in those low risk guidelines of, you know, one standard drink an hour, no more than 2 in a day, you know, with food, kind of keeping it within those guidelines so we're never to the point where we're intoxicated. Especially when we're around other people, are we holding those ethical guidelines? It's kind of going back to that walk, not just talk the talk. Other input, Dodie or others?
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point as far as, because I think that a lot of times it's not even considered. Like until you go through an ethics like this, it's like you think that you're okay, but I mean, now that you've gone through this, you know, you really are going to put it into practice, like as far as just being mindful of how you are in public. If you are having a few drinks, making sure that it's not to the intoxication level, you're staying within those low level guidelines. Because I mean, especially if, you know, I was teaching life skills in my hometown to 6th grade students, and I know most of their parents. And so if I'm talking about low risk guidelines with them as far, and you know, and not drinking until you're 21, if I'm going to be out and about with parents, I'm probably not going to want to be intoxicated around them, right? Because otherwise that's just going to discredit me, because a lot of the times they might be going home and say, oh, well, that prevention person that goes in and tells you not to drink, well, they were out and they were whooping it up on Saturday night, kind of a thing, you know. So is that going to give me the credibility to do my job if I'm out doing something like that?
And some prevention people choose because of that, just if they are going to drink, they won't drink in public. And I'm not saying, again, this is just a personal choice because they don't want to be out, you know, having dinner and see youth that they're working with. On the flip side of that, if you're just having a glass of wine with dinner, you are 21, you know, you don't have an addiction, you know, you can model to them that you can have a drink with dinner and not be intoxicated, you know, and stay within those lower guidelines. So, I mean, it kind of depends on where people's comfort level is. But I always say, just as a teacher or a medical professional, I do feel as a prevention person, we do have an obligation to conduct ourselves in a manner that if you were running into youth that you work with, you know, you hope you're conducting yourself in a professional manner at all times.
Right, good discussion. So the final concept under ethical obligations for community and society principle is the walking the walk of wellness. So I do have one more poll right here, and what I would like to do is have you just go through and click all the statements that apply to you. All right, so I'm going to end polling and I'm going to share the results here. So how many of you were able to, you know, say most of these you were able to do? A good majority of them. I see some, maybe about half, maybe, right? So we all work in a health-related field, yet very few of us are able to say that we are doing each of these on a consistent basis, right? So why do you think it's important as prevention professionals that we tend to our own wellness? Why is that important?
Well, it's kind of like, you know, going back to that airplane analogy, when they say, when those masks drop down and you have to put the mask on yourself first so that you can help somebody else. You have to help yourself first before you can help someone else.
Absolutely. Do you have the trainer's notes in front of you, Megan? Because that's the exact same analogy that they have in the trainer's notes. So good job. So with that being said, you know, why don't we take these actions to support our own health and well-being? Why are we not more mindful, and why couldn't we answer that a majority of those things that we just went through, you know, what gets in the way of that?
I think sometimes we just get comfortable in a rut or in our routines, or, you know, even though we know it's not what's best for us, if we're comfortable there, then we're going to stay there. You know, change is hard. I mean, just look at our clients, you know, I mean, change is hard. And so it's even hard for us. And it's important to, you know, kind of take your own advice.
Yep, exactly, right? Yeah. And sometimes I even feel that, you know, time can get in the way as well, as far as taking care of ourselves first. And so, but, you know, like Megan said, it's important that we are taking care of ourselves, because if we aren't, we're not going to be able to reach out and help those that we want to help, right? So remember the 8 dimensions of wellness that we talked about during the first portion of our SAPS class? I don't know that we necessarily need to go over these again like we did since we just did this within SAPS. But what I would like to point out is in your handouts section, there's an activity that says enhancing your wellness. And I don't think we're going to take time to go through that right now. But what I would like you to do and encourage you to do is go through this and kind of, it will help you to see, you know, where do I need to improve on? Is it underneath the emotional category? Am I looking at financial, social, maybe it's physical? You know, where is it that I need to maybe step up my efforts a little bit to take care of me so that my wellness wheel is kind of imbalanced? Remember, we talked about that in SAPS of how sometimes, depending on what's going on in your life, because of time, we might be focusing solely on the occupational at this time just because of what's going on and putting other things aside. And so our wheel becomes out of balance. And that might be okay for a little bit, but we really need to work to keep our wellness wheel in balance. Or it might be that, you know, I think we might have talked about where maybe there's a diagnosis of maybe someone has cancer. And so then, you know, your wellness wheel kind of becomes out of whack again because you're really focusing on a specific area at that point in time. So any questions about that? You know, as prevention and helpers, I think that this is so very important that we do really make sure that we are taking care of ourselves. And I would even encourage you to, you know, after you go through that activity, you know, write down what is one goal that you have for yourself, even to like finish out the summer here to kind of beef up your own wellness. So we went through the this ethical obligations principle. We've talked about advocating for prevention, including those programs, policies, and services, but really avoiding that lobbying in our role as prevention professionals. We talked about protecting the health of others, particularly when we're talking about substance use or abuse, both during and beyond our work hours. And then lastly, we talked about, you know, promoting our own health and wellness. So before we move on to the decision-making process, again, what I'd like you to do is let me know if you have any questions. Take out your ethics and prevention action steps. And under Principle 6, I want you to write down one thing that you learned or relearned in this section. And then what is one action you plan to take based on this principle? Would anyone want to share what they've learned or relearned or one action that they're planning to take based on this one?
I wrote, advocacy is educating, not telling them what to do or how to vote.
Thank you. Any others?
I never really considered how different advocacy and lobbying are. I thought that was interesting.
Because did you think they were one and the same? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I kind of thought they were a little more similar than they are. I didn't realize how different they actually are. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize that, that our agencies probably have guidelines for advocating too. I didn't realize that there were guidelines for that.
Yeah. So a little piece of homework to go back and see what the guidelines are, right? All right, well, with that, I'm going to move it on to Michelle, and she's going to take us through the ethical decision-making process.
Yes.
Oh, I have a comment.
Charlie said it does seem still like lobbying as a form of advocacy, but it almost seems like receiving federal funds is hush money. Yeah, I think what I've learned is that I pretty much I can do everything except for vote no on Senate Bill 82 against legalizing marijuana. You know, I can educate on all of that, but I just can't say specifically how you should vote one way or another. Now, I, as Michelle Majors, can, you know, I could go out and do that and say, I mean, it does get a little hairy when they figure out where I work, but if I'm doing it on my own as Michelle Majors, not as a prevention specialist of the Prevention Resource Center, I could do that, you know. So I can appreciate what you're saying as far as federal funds as hush money, but you need to say neutral with those federal dollars.
So the voting thing totally makes sense to me, and I don't think any organization should take a stance on how to vote, because you're like representing opinions of every single person that works there then. But is lobbying not also like trying to get get stuffs on the ballot to be voted on? Or maybe I'm still unclear on what lobbying is.
Right. So I mean, I think anytime I couldn't go out and get vote or, you know, so many signatures to get it on a ballot. And so when it comes to like marijuana, when I put a fact sheet out, I'm not necessarily saying I can educate, but here's the facts. Here's the facts about what we've seen with legalization of marijuana. But I'm not saying how you should feel, you know, I need to word it in a way that I'm just educating versus saying, this is why you should vote against legalization of marijuana. You know, I'm just stating facts.
So let me ask this, Michelle. If you are a coalition leader and you send out the facts about the marijuana because of the legislation that's coming up, or the vote that's coming up, you send it to your coalition, and then they take it. If they don't take it as part of the coalition, but they take it as themselves to their legislators and say, vote this way, that's not considered lobbying, because they're not, well, the coalition receives funding, but.
As long as I was a member of that coalition and I, Michelle Majors, take that information and hand it to them and just say, I feel that. But again, that educational information, I could send that information to a legislator under my grant. I'm just educating. I'm not telling you which way you should vote. And I'm not just saying marijuana is all bad. I'm just laying out the facts. And then based on that information, they can choose however they want to vote. So I feel legally, under my federal dollars, I could send that to a legislator as long as I'm not telling them how they should or shouldn't take a stance on that. I'm just educating them. Trust me, Charlie, this is something that it will be a never ending. We have gone through so much training on this, and yet we still kind of go, I don't know if we should do that. You know, we get very, so Dodie sent you something. I did just send another CACA handout, kind of a 2-pager that talks about legislation versus advocacy. That might help a little bit, but I don't ever feel like we're very black and white on this. We do always feel like there's a little gray area on how we should move forward with that. Okay, Megan, great. She said, I'm super thankful for the strategizer document you sent, Dodie. I'm the South Dakota PTA Board Vice President of Advocacy. So this is going to be very helpful, really helpful. Very good. All right, great discussion. So moving to ethical decision-making processes. I don't feel like you guys have to raise your hands or say anything, but when it comes to decision-making, just kind of some ponders on what kind of decision maker you are. How many of you tend to make decisions based on your gut or emotional reactions? How many of you think through each decision that you face in a thorough and logical way? How many of you have difficulty making decisions because you see so many possible courses of action? How many of you make decisions pretty quickly because the best possible course of action seems very clear? Regardless of your decision-making style, it is always our intent to make the best decision possible. This is particularly important when ethics are involved. Go ahead, Dodie. So it is your responsibility to act in ways that are consistent with the Prevention Code of Ethics. Sometimes this is clear and sometimes it's not. And that's why this ethical decision-making process that we're going to talk about can help us. Go ahead, Dodie. When to use the process. So a few things to look at. When a number of values are at stake and there seems to be no single best response, or there is a recognized difference of opinions between colleagues, and or people don't feel good about the circumstances or possible resolution. So hopefully this process, these steps we're going to go through will help when we're in these sort of situations. Go ahead, Dodie. So hopefully this looks very familiar to you when we went through it looks very familiar to the SPIF process. So step one is we are going to assess. Step two is once we assess, and assessing would be looking at all the different decisions we have to make. And then step two, we're going to do that planning. Step three, we're going to implement that plan. And then step four, we're going to evaluate it. So any basic decision-making model you've seen, that's what we're going to do. We're going to kind of weigh out those pros and cons to each decision. We're going to make a plan with which one we're going to go with. We're going to implement that. And then we need to make sure we evaluate it. Was that the best decision we could have made? Or maybe next time would we make a different decision? Okay. Go ahead, Dodie. So I want you to pull out, there's a handout called Scenario Do the Right Thing. It should be behind tab 8. And this is a scenario about Ty that you see here. And I'm going to give you just about 5 minutes to read this scenario to yourself. And then we'll discuss it. So does everybody see that handout? Megan says no, it should be behind tab 8. It should be, isn't it? Or is it tab, I have mine pulled out. So it should be, I think, tab 8, the first handout. Megan says yes. How about everybody else? I don't have everybody. Just unmute yourself or chat if you're having a hard time finding it. Otherwise, go ahead and take a couple minutes to read that and then we'll discuss it.
Where's
Can you
it at?
hold it up?
Yeah. So it says on there, scenario, do the right thing.
Mine was actually behind page 7 of where it has like the worksheets that we're going to be doing. Mine was behind it.
Yeah, I think it got out of order. I was just looking at that because I have a participant manual in front of me.
So it's in tab 8, but it was behind the small group activity. Okay,
Mhm.
Found it.
great.
We'll blame it on Stephanie.
That's right. I'm going to give a quick recap just so that everybody has the information. Basically, Ty is a prevention professional and he is implementing a school-based program. And they find out that the findings of the data is showing not only is this program helping, but it's actually kids are increasing use. So Ty has called together a school parent advisory board to share this information with them. And he told that to his supervisor, Mary, and Mary feels he should not share that information because she feels like it would take too much time and effort to get a new program running. She feels like her reputation might be tarnished because she's the one that brought this program to the forefront. And so Ty is unsure of what he should do, how he should proceed, because, you know, ethically he feels like he should be sharing this information. Okay. So now that we kind of have an idea of what Ty's dilemma is here, let's see what we can do to walk through this decision-making process. And I think this is a pretty common one, to be honest with you. You know, I'm implementing life skills and everybody loves the program and everyone's on it, you know, the parents love it, the school board loves it, but we start looking at our data and we are not seeing, it's not moving the needle, but yet it's like, well, this is what we've always done. We're just going to keep on doing it, right? Okay. So the first step is, again, is we're going to assess. So we're going to identify the problem. We're going to consider the influential factors and we're going to consult with others. So this first one, go ahead to the next slide, Dodie, is identifying the problem. So first we want to establish the facts. We just want to look at what the facts are. So the facts are objective and unbiased, not based on personal opinion or perception. We're just simply looking at what are the facts here. The second one is we're going to identify the problem. So we're going to state the problem in one sentence. We're going to draw on the facts and use terms that are concrete, specific, and neutral. And that last one is we are going to identify the principle or principles involved in the situation using the prevention code of ethics. So that's all that we're going to do to identify the problem. Dodie, do you think I have time to have them break out into groups for this one quickly? Or should we just work together? Let's see, what time are we at here? 10:30. Just for this first one, let's go ahead and do it and then we'll process the other one. So if you could break them up into 3 groups. The first group, I just want you to simply establish the facts. So these are no personal opinions, but based on Ty's story, we just want you to come up with what are the facts. The second group, you're going to state the problem in one sentence. So based on what you just read, what is the problem that Ty's trying to address here? And then number 3, select which principle or principles from the Prevention Code of Ethics are involved in this situation and justify your selection. So when you look at that Principle Code of Ethics, those 6 different ones, which one do you think is in play here for Ty?
So do you want me to put them there? So I have them in 3 breakout rooms, so I have to tell them what they're doing or just go?
Yes, so group 1 will establish the facts. That's who?
So group 1 is Emily, Megan, and Rebecca.
Okay, so you'll establish the facts. Group 2?
Group 2 is Belinda, Bill, Christina, and Dominique.
So you're going to state the problem in one sentence. And group 3?
Group 3 is Charlie, Holly, and Katie.
And so you guys are going to identify which principle or principles out of the Code of Ethics you think are involved. Oh, that was sweet, Belinda, what Megan said. Your husband.
Yeah, Jay said, were you on video just now? I go, yeah, I have my video on all the time. He goes, oh, great.
Very sweet. Okay, any questions about what we're asking you to do? For the sake of time, we'll probably max 5 minutes here. Just be willing to report out group 1, the facts, group 2, that problem sentence, and group 3, what principle or principles out of the Code of Ethics you think are in play here for Ty. And Dodie's going to open up those breakout rooms and you're going to go ahead and join them. Okay, so group 1, establish the facts. So what facts did you come up with when you were assessing this?
We kind of boiled it down to two big facts. The first one is that there are 2 studies that indicate an increase in substance use.
Mm-hmm.
And the other fact is that his boss doesn't want him to share this information.
Great. Those are two great ones. A couple other ones that they had listed here is that Do the Right Thing's been delivered to thousands of students over the past 8 years. And it's popular with the school admin, teachers, parents, and students. So great job establishing those facts. So then, based on those facts, group 2, you stated the problem. So what's your one sentence that you came up with to state the problem that Ty is looking at here?
Well, we had one really long sentence with a bunch of commas and ands.
Okay.
So, yeah. The program is ineffective and has led to increase in substance use in some population, and the supervisor is unwilling to be honest with the statistics.
Great. Yeah, I mean, the one they have here is current research shows that the Do the Right Thing curriculum is ineffective, but Ty's supervisor wants to continue to support it and not share the results. So, I mean, yeah, I think you guys did a great job. Very, very good. So the last one is then, what principle or principles do you think are at play here?
So we had several. So integrity, we felt was a big one. You know, cultural competence, obviously, if they're seeing an increase in some of those areas that the programming isn't very culturally competent. The nature of services principle, and then the ethical obligations for community and society.
Great. Yeah, they didn't have the cultural one listed here, but I can totally see how that one came into play, and the other 3 are listed. So very, very good. All right. Keep that in the back of your mind, and we're going to keep going through here. The next piece to assessing the problem here is considering influential factors. So we would look at both internal and external factors. So when we're looking at internal factors, that would include our personal perspectives, values, and needs that might introduce bias or otherwise affect our decision. And the external factors would be those perspectives of others involved in the parties, including their rights, vulnerabilities, and responsibilities. So when we think back to Ty's story, what are some of the internal and external factors he should consider as he assesses his problem? So what are some internal factors that Ty might be looking at?
Perhaps staying true to himself and what he sees as an ethical obligation versus protecting the integrity, or not the integrity, but the reputation of the program.
Absolutely. So personally, he might think that it's not right to use an ineffective program, right? But as you said, so then he, in addition, Mary, his supervisor, has power over his job, and he may feel worried about jeopardizing his relationship and his position in the agency as well. So because he thinks it's ineffective, he's feeling like, I have this internal values that I feel like I need to say something to the parents in the community. But he's probably also kind of worried about his job, right? So what are some external factors that are influencing Ty's decision?
His prevention code of ethics.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think also his boss's emotional attachment to the program. She seems to kind of see it as a personal failure and has some like emotional stake in it being successful, even if it's just perceived as being successful.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, absolutely. So code of ethics, Ty's supervisor, anybody else do you think that external factors that might influence his decision?
The fact that the parents and teachers and everybody seems to have buy-in.
Absolutely. Yep. So the school district, parents, and students. A couple other ones, possibly the funder, because the funders would likely not want to support a curriculum with poor evaluation results, right? So this is probably more important to them than having the agency adhere to the contract. And then the executive director of the agency might be concerned about fulfilling the agency's contract with its funder. So she'll likely not want to continue supporting a curriculum that recently showed ineffective results as well. But she might also be concerned about the agency's reputation once the word gets out that the curriculum isn't working. So he has quite a few external factors that he needs to weigh out when making this decision. Go ahead, Dodie. And then consulting with others. So it's important to consult with others who have more knowledge about or experience with the issue involved in the problem you're facing. So an example I have here is if you were about to buy a new car, would you look to your best friend who knows very little about cars for help? Or would you contact a mechanic you trust or consult consumer websites for information and guidance? Well, of course, we'd go with someone who has a little bit of experience, right? It's the first thing my dad does when he buys a car is he drives it right over to Charlie's because he knows Charlie so well, and he's going to really be honest with him and tell him if you should buy this car or not, right? So when faced with an ethical dilemma in your work as prevention professionals, who are some of the people you can look to for help when making decisions? So when you're in this ethical dilemma, not this particular one, but when you're facing a dilemma like this in the prevention world, who do you go to for guidance? Clinical supervisor, absolutely, great. So supervisor.
Was it not his supervisor that was asking him to lie, or?
Right, so in Ty's situation, that's probably not going to work, right? But just kind of brainstorming at large, you personally, who would you go to? Who are some people you could go to consult with?
Michelle Majors.
Yeah, Dodie and I do that a lot. We talk about on, maybe a daily basis. So we definitely lean on each other when it comes to that. So yeah, I mean, supervisors or other experienced colleagues, you know, Dodie and I have both been in the field 15 plus years, so we feel like we can kind of lean on each other when it comes to that. Possibly, you know, in Ty's situation, you might need to even go to the board of directors if, you know, if you're, typically the board of directors are our bosses if you have a board. Coalition leaders, evaluators. Most coalitions or all coalitions should have an evaluator, and they should be able to help in the situation as well. Legal counsel, and then state prevention agency representatives. So, you know, going to your funders or, you know, in our case, the DSS behavioral health program. All right, so once we've assessed, and we can tell there's a lot that we've identified. Well, go ahead.
Did you see the chat?
Who is Zoltar?
Did you ever watch the movie Big?
You've never seen Big?
I have, but it's
the fortune teller.
Oh, I love it. That's my number one right there. That's who I'm going to go to. I love it. Man, it has been years since I've seen that movie. That's great. All right, so we're going to identify the problem, consider influential factors, and consult with others. So we're going to go to the fortune teller. And actually, you know what? Dodie is a fortune teller. She has this crystal ball, and she can look at. She's
the sign hanging up that says, "Let me check my crystal ball." So you just tell me, and I will check my crystal ball.
So when we don't know something, we ask her, well, what do you think's going to happen here? And she's like, I'm sorry, I don't have my crystal ball in front of me to tell you that, right? So, all right. So we've assessed. Now we've assessed all those different things that, you know, what's our problem? You know, what's influencing that? And who can we consult with? Now we need to plan for what we want to do. So we're going to brainstorm possible options. Once we've brainstormed all of those, so we're at this point when we're brainstorming, we're not going, is that unethical or ethical? We're just kind of laying out all the possible options. Then we're going to eliminate those unethical options. And then we're going to consider the remaining options. So once we've eliminated the unethical ones, then we're going to look at the pros and cons to the remaining options. Go ahead, Dodie. So, do we want to just work through this one, Dodie? Because then I'd have them go into small groups here again. Otherwise, you know what, let's just do this as a whole group. What are some possible options here? What are some possible options of what Ty could do? Again, we're not trying to say are these unethical or ethical options, but what are based on Ty's story, what could he possibly do here?
Send out the results in a mass email.
Yes. Send out results in a mass email. What else?
Seek outside supervision, possibly from a colleague that doesn't know anyone that he works with, or just get more supervision and guidance to kind of work through it.
Okay. Kind of what we've done already in the, hopefully in assessing stages, reached out and got that guidance, but yeah. But I agree with you, absolutely.
You know, if they felt comfortable, if Ty had a good relationship with his supervisor, he could maybe just talk to her and just, you know, kind of get real honest, you know, without being condescending or condemning, to just be honest and talk about it and process it, and, you know, kind of bring the ethics part into the conversation.
Yeah, so I
think
understand.
it maybe change your mind.
Sure. So Mary, I understand your concerns of, you know, you brought this program to it and everything, but here's where I'm seeing kind of an ethical dilemma with this, and kind of talk through it a little bit more. And yeah, absolutely.
I think when you're having those tough conversations too, it's always good to come with an alternative, like, I've researched this program, or we can seek, like you said, like with Lifeways, like call the publisher or whatever and ask how to make it more culturally competent, or what are some ways that you can make it more effective.
Mm-hmm.
And those, if it's a evidence-based practice and it's not effective, then those stats probably should be reported to whomever you purchased the program from.
Great. So going back to the developers and giving them that data. And I always think then it's always important to have data to figure out, why was it ineffective? Were we not implementing the program with fidelity? Was it not the right program for the culture that we were working with? Was it me as the presenter? You know, they just weren't, I wasn't doing a good job of presenting the information, or they weren't connecting with me. You know, what was it that was causing this program to not be effective? But going to the developers and letting them know that, great. Go behind as boss if there is another hire or supervisor position. Yeah, I mean, if you've already talked to the boss and you feel like they're not, you know, she's still saying, nope, Ty, you can't share that information, then ethically he may feel he needs to go to her supervisor or the board of directors or whoever that is to have that conversation. Great. So for the sake of time, let's look at the 5 possible options they have up here. So the first one is do nothing. Ty could just do nothing, you know, just continue to do what he's always done. He's just going to continue with the program and do nothing. He could release the evaluation results to the school anonymously, kind of what I think it was Emily that said, send out results in a mass email, or send out the information anonymously. Third one would be suggest that school officials request evaluation results. So, you know, you go to the admin and say, we have the evaluation results. I think you should request those from the agency. Ty could quit the job to avoid dealing with the situation. You know, he doesn't, he just feels stuck, and so he's just going to quit his job. And then the third or the fifth one is tell executive director about the dilemma. So those were the 5 ones listed there. So now when we look at these plans, which ones do you think that we need to eliminate because they would be unethical?
Uh-oh, I don't know what happened.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have no idea what that is.
Okay, just a second here.
I think it means swim away as quickly as you can from the whole situation. I think it means go on vacation.
PowerPoint at the bottom, like if you can, there we go.
I kind of
Go ahead.
I kind of feel like him just quitting is a little unethical. Like, I mean, for him, it might be the easiest way out, but if he is a prevention specialist and intends to continue to work in prevention, he is not following his code of ethics if he just quits and leaves that situation the way it is.
You're absolutely right, Megan. Yep. So just quitting his job to not deal with the situation would be unethical. What do you think the other one would be unethical? So the other one would be,
Nothing.
Maybe
yes,
sending
doing
out
nothing.
oh,
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, so the doing nothing would be that omission. So according to the competency principle and the prevention code of ethics, we cannot ignore the fact that someone else is acting unethical. Ty cannot do nothing and he cannot quit his job. Ty has to take action. So he's just, that would be omission, right? He sees something ethical happen, but he does nothing about it. Okay, go ahead, Dodie. So now that we've gotten rid of the two that we feel are unethical, Ty has three remaining options. It could be release the evaluation results to school anonymously, suggest that school officials request evaluation results, and then tell executive director about the dilemma. So what are the pros and cons of the first option, which is to release the evaluation results anonymously to the school committee? What would be the pros and cons to that?
Well, he's already told his boss that he's seen the results. So even though it's going to be anonymous to everybody else, it probably isn't going to be anonymous to her.
Right.
So his job might still be in jeopardy.
Absolutely. Anything else that you could think of there as a pro or con? So a pro, they say, is sharing the evaluation results would put the research in the hands of the schools so they could decide themselves what they want to do. You know, once the school has that data, they could decide if they want to continue moving forward with it or if they want to take a different course of action. As Emily said, his boss is going to know. So leaking the results seems to conflict with Ty's personal values. As reflected in the case example, he values honesty. It could damage his professional reputation as trustworthy if people as his agency or school officials find out that he leaked this information rather than approaching the problem openly and honestly, which would probably be found out because his boss does know. How about that second one? Suggests that school officials request evaluation results. Can you see any pros and cons to that one?
In a way, I feel like it's kind of going behind his own agency's back, his supervisor's back. You know, I see kind of a problem with that.
Yep. Because once they have the information, they're probably going to go to Mary and tell her that they know. You know, it says so the pros, they say, is sharing the evaluation results would put the research in the hands of the schools so they can make the decision themselves, like we talked about before. But the school officials will probably want Ty to tell them what the results show, and he will have to avoid doing this, which would be kind of awkward. Ty also knows that once they see the results, they're going to be displeased and will probably approach Mary. Mary will be angry with Ty that he told the school about the research, and this could jeopardize his working relationship. And then the last one is telling the executive director about the dilemma. Do you see any pros or cons to that one? And they say the pros is if Ty tells the executive director about the situation, she will have the results and will be responsible for deciding what to do. So it's kind of in her hands now. He did his job of reporting it to them, and Ty will feel like he acted ethically. The cons could be that the director will undoubtedly approach Mary, which will make Mary angry with Ty for going over her head and could jeopardize their working relationship. All right, go ahead, Dodie. So we've got 3 different options for a plan, and we've talked about the pros and cons. Go ahead. Go ahead. Now we are going to look at implementing. So Ty now needs to make a decision and carry out that decision. So which decision would you make? Would you release evaluation results to the school anonymously? Would you suggest that school officials request the evaluation results, or would you tell the executive director about the dilemma? So maybe just chat into the chat box. We'll say 1, 2, 3. Who would do 1?
I have a poll.
Oh, awesome.
There you go.
All right, so which one would you do? Go ahead and fill that out, and once Dodie sees most have answered, we will launch it and see what you guys thought.
Okay, and there you go, Michelle.
Okay, so the majority said they would tell the executive director about the dilemma. And there really wasn't a wrong decision here. No matter what you put there, 13% did one, 25% did two, and then 63% did the third one. The important point is that he had to take action because it was an unethical behavior in his workforce. So based on his code of ethics, he needed to make a decision here. And none of these were wrong decisions because we saw pros and cons to all of them. We had already eliminated the unethical one, so none of them were wrong, but he had to go with the one he thought was best. And for this scenario, we're going to say that he told the executive director about this dilemma. Okay, go ahead, Dodie. So once Ty has implemented that, he told the executive director about the dilemma, then we need to reflect on that decision. Go ahead, Dodie. And some things we need to evaluate once we've implemented that. Ask ourselves, what was the outcome of the decision? What worked well? What would you do differently? Should anything more have been done? So based on the decision that we did make as a group was to tell the executive director, how do you think things would work out for him, for Ty in that situation? Or do you think he will need to do anything else to fully resolve the ethical dilemma? So he told the executive director, do you think there's anything else he needs to do to fully resolve this ethical dilemma other than telling the executive director?
So this is just the paranoid me. I think talking with the executive director that it's important to send an email or essentially document that conversation so that he has as a CYA kind of thing in case something goes bigger. Am I making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think documentation is always very important. So that completely makes sense. So kind of following up, even if you tell them verbally, you're kind of following up with an email. This is what we, just as a follow-up to our conversation, this is what we talked about. Yeah, absolutely. Rebecca also said he could tell Mary that he told the director, so have that conversation. I'm not trying to go over your back, but based on my code of ethics as a prevention specialist, I feel that I needed to let the director know of that information, and he can do as he wants with that information, but that was my ethical obligation. Great. Okay, so now Dodie's going to kind of recap what we talked about as a big picture of that, reviewing this decision-making process, and I'm going through a couple more activities before we close up.
All right, so yeah. So under assess, remember, we identified what the problem was, using, making sure that we had that neutral problem statement and keeping like all the, opinions kind of out of it. So what is the problem that we're dealing with? We're going to consider the influential factors and we're going to consult with others. Under plan, we're going to brainstorm what are those options, and it can be anything from good to bad to ugly kind of a thing. You're going to brainstorm what can we do. Then we're going to take some time to eliminate those unethical options, and as a result of eliminating those, we're going to consider what the remaining options are and choose which is going to be the best decision under the implement, and then we're going to carry out that decision. And then after we carry out that decision, we're going to evaluate, was that the right route to go, reflect what we maybe have done differently next time, and that kind of a thing. Are there any questions about the decision-making process? So what I think we're going to do is I'm going to break you back into your breakout rooms. We're all going to work on the same scenario, and I want you to work through the decision-making process with that. And then we'll just kind of come back together and we will chat about, you know, kind of what the groups talked about. So if you could take out in your back handout piece of it again of section 8, it says small group activity, applying the decision-making process, and we're going to do the JADA scenario. So if you could find that. Is this sounding okay to you, Michelle? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you probably about 15 minutes to work through this, work through the assess, work through the plan and the implement, and then the evaluate piece, and answering the questions under that. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about what you guys talked about in your small groups. So are there any questions? And has everybody found the JADA scenario?
I have not. Where did you say it was?
So it's in the handout section of section 8. So there should be like a copy behind the PowerPoints, like a colored copy, and then behind that is where it is. So it says small group activity, applying the decision-making process, JADA scenario. It was where you found the tie scenario as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. So any questions? All right, I'm going to go ahead and open all rooms, and you will need to join the rooms, and then I will bring you back in about 15 minutes. All right, everybody should be back, right? So how was that? Did you guys have a good discussion?
It wasn't long enough. We need more time.
Sorry. Michelle's fault. How far did you get in the process?
Task number 2.
Oh, how about everyone else? Or the other group?
We were just getting to task number 2, but we really quickly just kind of talked about final what we would do.
Well, shoot, I should have given you an extra 5 minutes, probably for sure, but we'll just walk through it. How does that sound?
Yeah.
Okay, so what did you guys come up with for listing the facts?
The daughters are 8. He's visibly drunk. This is the first time they've met, and she's a prevention specialist.
Okay. How about the other group? Did you have anything else? The one other thing that I had is Michael plans to drive himself and his child home from Jada's house. So that was just the one additional one. How about, how did you state the problem in one sentence using concrete, specific, and neutral terms?
Okay. Jada has never met Michael, but is concerned he's drunk and will drive his daughter home.
Okay. How about the other group? What'd you come up with?
We just said the dad arrives to drive his daughter home, is intoxicated.
Okay. Good. Yeah, so what they have here is Michael, who is visibly impaired, plans to drive himself and his child home, and Jada must decide whether, and if so, how to intervene. What are the principles under the Prevention Code of Ethics that are involved in this situation?
We said number 3 and number 6.
Number 3 and number 6, which are,
Number 3 is integrity. Number 6 is how it affects the community and something else.
ethical obligations to community and society. Yeah, good, perfect. Okay, good job. So when we're looking at the internal factors, what were some of the things that you came up with in regards to Jada's perspective, values, needs that might affect her decision?
There may be an emotional component aside from being a prevention specialist, but just being a mom.
Okay.
And that might guide her decision making.
What else?
That it doesn't just affect the girls that he's picking up, that it affects whoever else is on the road at the time.
Yep, absolutely. Do you guys come up with any others? So some of the other ones that we have listed here is because of her training, Jada recognizes the signs and symptoms of alcohol impairment. Also because of her training, she knows that there are laws and risks associated with driving under the influence. And then the last one that you didn't mention was Jada is uncomfortable with the prospect of confronting Michael, whom she has just met. So how about external factors? What did you come up with?
We were kind of talking about how the effects for the other drivers on the road. If, you know, I mean, he drove over there, so he could have gotten in an accident. And then if he leaves with his daughter, just what could happen to the other people in the community who are driving, and them as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then just the fact that, you know, Michael doesn't even appear to have any concerns about driving under the influence, right? He thinks he's okay to do that. How about the fact that we know that Michael's probably not expecting any kind of confrontation at this point when he's picking his daughter up, right? Yep. And so really that kind of puts the daughter in a vulnerable position as well, because you don't know how the whole conversation is going to go down if she does intervene in that, right? Okay, so moving on to consulting with others. Did you talk about that one at all? There's really no time for Jada to consult with others, is there? But what she could potentially do is just kind of rely on maybe past situations that she's encountered and how it was handled, things like that, kind of look to that for guidance as well. So looking at step 2 plan, what are some possible options that you came up with?
She could invite him in for several cups of coffee over several hours.
With this guy who she just met. Trying to find conversation, right? Okay, what else?
She could offer to drive him home.
Okay.
She could try to stall long enough to call the kid's mom.
Okay. Any others? So here are the ones that they
You
have.
could always just say, he doesn't seem that drunk, whatever, just let him go. You know, it's probably gonna be, he lives 6 blocks away, it's probably okay.
Yep. So basically that's the say and do nothing, right? And that was the first one that I was going to mention, is that's one of the options that's on here. The next one they have is to tell Michael the children are having fun, suggest that his daughter keep playing and she will drive her home later. What could be pros and cons of that one?
he's probably still gonna go drive somewhere else.
Right. So still a danger to the people on the road, right? The pro would be that Jada could avoid that uncomfortable conversation that she has to have, right? But still, the con is that he'll still be driving. The next one is send both children inside and tell Michael that she will not release his daughter because he is impaired and she's concerned about the girl's safety. What do you think about pros and cons of that one?
Well, it could go really good or it can go really bad.
Right.
He could get defensive. He could take his daughter, and then then what? Or he could say, you're right. I kind of feel like I had a little too much, and maybe I could sit down for a while or whatever.
Mhm. Absolutely. Okay. The pro would be that the daughter would be safe at least, right? But others, if he does leave, still would not be. The next one is share concerns with Michael and offer to drive him and his daughter home. Pros and cons. What do you think?
I really like this option, and Belinda brought that to our group. But has anybody ever driven a really drunk person home? Anybody spent time being a DD with
Yes.
who thinks that they're able to drive? That's kind of a compromising situation also, in my experience.
Well, and especially this is someone that she doesn't know, right? And so you're going to be putting yourself, your daughter, his daughter, all in the car. So that might be a con right there, is that you don't know how that's going to end either, right?
Dodie, we have 1 minute.
Oh, okay. So then we're looking at the next step of planning is considering the options. So what are we looking at what do you think would be the best option of the ones that we looked at? Or which ones would you eliminate for sure?
Do nothing.
Okay, do nothing.
Allow him to leave the girls there and drive away.
So you would eliminate that one, or that might be an option?
I don't think that's an option.
Okay.
For him to drive away from the facility.
Okay.
If the girls are safe. I don't
Okay.
think so.
Any others? Which one do you think she should go with?
I kind of think reading that whole statement they have there, Dodie, on making a decision would be helpful.
Absolutely, yeah. So the decision in this situation like this might need to unfold, and it might really involve several steps, depending on how the dad responds in an effort to resolve the situation. So Jada might want to begin by expressing her concerns and trying to find a safe way home for Michael and his daughter. And if that doesn't work, she could at least try to keep Michael's daughter out of the car and contact the police to intervene if Michael is indeed determined to drive under the influence. So, it's kind of going to have to be like let's use our I statements about being concerned, and I'd really like to help you find another way home. And depending on how that goes, will kind of maybe depend on what you're going to end up doing. So, then you would want to, really reflect on that decision under the evaluation piece to figure out if that was the right decision. And because we don't know how that all played out, it's going to kind of just depend. So are there any questions about that? Can you see how using this decision-making process could be helpful? Mm-hmm. And can you see how it's important to pull it back to the Prevention Code of Ethics, the 6 different principles that we talked about, because then you kind of have a basis for your decision-making process, right? Let's see here. All right. So basically what we're going to do to quickly wrap up here is I would like you to I just want to point out that there's another worksheet that's in back with your handouts. And it is called the Ethics in Action. So it kind of like just helps you to walk through each of the different principles with different scenarios and to determine if it's consistent with the principle that they're trying to describe or not. I don't believe that you have the answers. So if you do go through that and you want the answers, let me know and I can send them your way. So with that, Michelle, do you have anything more to add?
No, just that we will send out a kind of a quick SurveyMonkey link of an evaluation of just this ethics portion. Probably by the end of today or tomorrow.
Okay.